All right. Hey, Sterile Processing Universe. It's Hank Balch here from Beyond Clean, and you are watching a live LinkedIn feed, the first ever of our show and our brand, and the first ever for me. So it's going to be an exciting conversation today. If for nothing else, we're going to figure out all this technology together. But hopefully we'll have some exciting content for you as well. I've got a special guest that we'll introduce here in a moment to talk about a topic that I believe really hits home for everyone in the industry, from the technician, manager, all the way up to the director, and a number of other services outside of the department itself. And we'll get into more specifics about that here in a moment. So if you're tuning on, I'd love to know that you're on the feed. And if you would let me know that you can hear us well, that you can see us well. And then also, if you're tuning in from a particular country, if you're in the US, put your state down, if you would, in the comments. But if you're tuning in from another country too, please let us know that in the comment section as well. And at some time over this broadcast, I'm going to give away some freebies from the Beyond Clean merch store. So maybe a coffee mug, maybe a t-shirt, and perhaps even a copy of my new book. But we'll cross that bridge later on down the road when we get there. So let's give everybody a couple of minutes here to start tuning in. I see some commenters here. Already got one from David. Yeah, so he's giving some insight on some labor costs. So we're going to talk about that. Definitely here. I got a shout out from Pennsylvania. Thank you, fellow Pennsylvania. Okay, so we'll give a couple of more seconds here. Let the slowpokes tune in. If you're not familiar with the new live feed from LinkedIn, it's an application process, and I actually put it in probably a couple of months ago. So it took a while to get approved to be able to talk to y'all through LinkedIn Live. But I'm excited about the potential to talk about sterile processing topics, that sterile processing hashtag that you see in the bottom right of your screen. All the topics that you see come across your LinkedIn news feed, or if you're watching through Facebook or through the YouTube channel. It's that hashtag that you should be following on any social media platform. If you're on Twitter or Instagram, that's the way that these kinds of these kinds of topics are categorized on social media for you to keep a pulse on the conversations of the day. If it's new articles, new podcasts, new conferences that are coming down the pipeline, that's the hashtag that should be signaling to you that, hey, I should pay attention to this if I'm in the sterile processing industry. All right, we've got some folks tuning in from Northern California here, Colorado. Thanks. Even Justin Poulin, hey, he's honoring us with his presence while he's on vacation. Thanks, Justin, tuning in. California, Maryland, hey, got a shout out from the UK. Oh, Brazil, Oregon, Virginia, and Maryland. Keep them coming, guys. Okay, so I think we have a quorum here. Plenty of folks now have tuned in. So we're going to get the conversation started. I'm going to stop wasting your time to get you to a thought leader in the industry. Many of you have seen or heard from him before, and hopefully you've read the article that we're going to be talking about today. And this was an article that was published in 2019 on the Beyond Clean blog, but I'm not going to steal his thunder. So let me introduce you to our guest today. Okay, and that worked. Jim, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Oh, life is beautiful. How about for you, Hank?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you on short notice being willing to be the guinea pig for the first LinkedIn live stream. So thanks for being brave.
Hey, always happy to help get the word out about the important things that we need to be looking at in our field of sterile processing. It's critical that we communicate with each other, work with each other, break down any barriers that keep us from being able to work together to help keep our patients safe.
Right. and the breaking down of barriers, that's a funny, or it's an interesting phrase because we use that a lot in our industry, and I'm sure other folks use it outside of sterile processing. But in sterile processing, we are confined by four walls, and yet there's so much that's happening outside of our four walls that are impacting our people and our patients. And unless we have opportunities just like this to go outside of our department and talk about those challenges that are impacting us today, or perhaps they're going to impact us tomorrow, and it's hard to find solutions in the moment, so that we don't get blindsided. And I think actually this particular topic on that point about blindsiding is an important one. So to give our audience a little background, I mentioned that we published this article in 2019. I did not talk about the title of the article. So could you share with us the topic of the article itself and what prompted you in general to write something on this particular topic?
Well, Hank, I believe that in the next 5 to 10 years, we are going to encounter an acute staffing crisis within sterile processing. There is a confluence of trends that are working together that are going to cause us to have a labor supply that just will not be able to meet the demand that is going to be required. What got me started thinking about this was back when I was at Penn State University. I used to work about 45 minutes from where you're living now.
Okay, I didn't know that. That's good.
Yeah, I was in York, Pennsylvania with WellSpan Health.
Okay.
And I was going to Penn State University to get my MBA. And in one of my classes, we studied about some trends, and the graying population was a huge trend that we looked at. And one of the things that really struck me is when our professor pointed out how with the graying population, and you're seeing it in some countries already, there is not enough people in the younger generations to be able to take care of the people who are aging and will need more health care. You're seeing this already in a country like Japan, where they are literally importing people from the Philippines to come take care of their older population and exporting some of their older population to the Philippines to get them taken care of.
Wow.
And this is something that's going to be happening in all of the industrialized countries throughout the world in the next half century, that we're going to have such an increase in population of the older people compared to the younger people that there just won't be people to take care of them. Right. And we're going to encounter that even more in sterile processing, I believe, because we're getting increased complexity of our instruments, and that's not going to go away. Right. They just keep getting more complex, which requires more and more technical expertise, more training.
Now, before you go into that, because I want to get to that complex instrument piece, because you're right, that has all kinds of ripple effects, right? Even outside of the staffing question and topic that we're going to talk about today, because it has issues with quality and training and even the science of developing developing the instruments themselves. But I guess I wanted to go back. I didn't get a chance to ask you to give a little bit more background about yourself. So you've got credentials in the field, give us a little experience about who you are besides this guy who sounds like he knows what he's talking about when it comes to sterile processing staffing. But if you could help us color in the lines a little bit.
Okay, well, I've been working in sterile processing within hospitals since 1997. Prior to that, I was working as a dental assistant in the Army and in civilian life. So since 1992, I've actually been cleaning and sterilizing medical and dental instruments. I worked my way up from a technician who did 11 straight months working only in decontamination to supervisor, manager, and director. My most recent position was as a system director with Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. And during that time, I also worked on getting my bachelor's degree and my MBA so that I could learn how to analyze the trends and present the data. One thing I learned early on as a sterile processing manager, I was always at a competitive disadvantage when it came to getting capital funding within the hospital, because sterile processing is a cost center, not a revenue center.
Right.
We don't make money directly. And so I needed to learn, how can I make that case to show why we need the equipment and the resources to do our job, and be able to relate that to how the clinical revenue generating departments can improve their abilities. So that's why I did that. And one of the things that it developed was, this interest in looking at hiring and staffing, and how do we staff properly. And it's an ongoing issue, and I think it's only going to get worse.
Yeah. Well, I think you're auditioning for another interview on this show to talk about the cost center conversation in sterile processing, because you're right. And we've actually had that come up a couple of times on the Beyond Clean podcast. But the question around, do managers and directors in sterile processing have adequate training to make the financial case for the tools that they need, or the people that they need in the context of this conversation today? So let's not cover that ground yet, but put a pin in that, and we'll come back to that on another show. I want to give a shout out to a couple more folks who have joined in on the thread. We see some folks from New York, Michigan, all the way from Bahrain, and I saw one from Qatar, New York. Got a couple of New Yorkers here. Chuck Hughes, hey Chuck. And then we got Joanne also from England tuning in. So if you're just now joining the feed, please give us a shout out for where you're watching from in the sterile processing universe. And the topic that you see at the bottom that we're talking to Jim about today is what he calls the looming sterile processing staffing crisis. So I think a lot of folks are going to see that title, Jim, and say, well, I'm not exactly sure what he's about to say, but I think I got a good idea. So you were just giving us a little background beforehand on the high level, what prompted you to write this article. And I stopped you after you were discussing the complex instrumentation, but can you go into that a little bit more, and the impact of that is having, or could have, or will have on the staffing crisis that we're going to be discussing here a little bit later?
Oh, certainly. So with the advent of laparoscopic surgery and all kinds of endoscopic procedures, we introduced a much greater level of complexity. And now we've even got the robotic surgeries. And we, of course, have these endoscopes with their incredibly complex lever arms that are incredibly difficult to clean, with 36-page IFUs in order to properly clean them before you can even disinfect them. All of that complexity contributes to diminishing the pool of available workers who would be able to perform this work. It's no longer an unskilled profession. It is, in my estimation, a skilled profession. Unfortunately, we're still getting paid at unskilled wages.
Right.
And so all of that contributes to decreasing the available amount of appropriate workers. And then when we have the trends of increasing certification requirements. Currently in the United States, we have 4 states. It will soon be more. But even in places where it's not a requirement, almost all large healthcare systems are pretty much making it one anyway. Or they might hire somebody in, but within a year to 2 years, they have to get their certification. So it's becoming a de facto requirement.
Yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, we announced a massive national survey. Actually, it was a 3-part survey that we took a look at the social economic status of the industry, and we're asking things about department safety, we're asking things about economics training certification, and we just got a sneak peek at the statistics or the results for that this past week. We can't talk about them yet because we're going to be putting those together in a very special presentation type thing. But let's suffice it to say that that certification and education topic, which we're going to talk about again on one of your recommendations for how to solve this staffing crisis here in a bit, but that's a real issue. And there's a lot of conceptions or misconceptions about the impact of like certain training, credentials, education opportunities that do come into play. But, you know, your point by itself is valid that 10 years ago till now, the standards for what makes a sterile processing technician hireable, or the potential pool that you have of available candidates when you're looking at it from an HR perspective, to say in our region, in our geography, we have 100 sterile processing technicians that meet the minimum recommendations. If you're in a particular state that requires it, you know, those are certain recommendations. Mm-hmm. Or if you're a facility, to your point, that just set those of their own accord, and that does dwindle the available pool pretty substantially.
Mm-hmm. And then, so we have those two trends that combine to shrink the applicant pool. Mm-hmm. And then we've got the trend with the graying population that is going to increase the demand. And if you can pull up the little chart I have, I found this chart from the United Nations website. They track population trends, and one of the things that they use, and I don't really like this phrase that they use, they call it the dependency ratio. But basically, this is a measure of the amount of population over the age of 65 relative to those under the age of 65. And it's a good rough measure just to say, how many people will we have requiring health care versus how many people who would be available to be in the pool that could deliver it. And what you see is, for North America, over the next several years, going to about 2040, we're going to have about a 20% increase in the number of people over 65 relative to those under.
Wow.
And in Europe, that's over 30%. In the industrialized countries, we are seeing a much higher or a much lower population growth, while the population is actually aging, and that's going to put a real strain, not just in sterile processing, but in all of healthcare. Being able to meet the demand, having the workers who will be able to take care of all those people.
Yeah, that's right. And there's been a number of articles out from organizations such as AORN, you know, talking about the coming nursing shortage. Mm-hmm. But until your article was published in December, I hadn't really heard a lot of sterile processing folks, you know, stand up and say, "Hey guys, you know, that demographic." The demographic trend that we're seeing, it's going to impact us too. Mm-hmm. So it would be in our best interest to get prepared, like the Boy Scouts like to say. Before we move on to some proposals, or maybe actually before we get into some of your proposals and recommendations, I want you to line out a little bit more of how this demographic change and trend is going to impact us. But I want to get to the audience poll first. So if you look at the bottom of your screen and feed, hopefully you can see an audience poll down there that says, do you believe that we're heading into a sterile processing staffing crisis? So if you're watching us live, please put your answer down in the comment section. If you believe that we are heading into a crisis or that we're not heading into a crisis. And I think, you know, there could be a difference of opinion here depending on the data that you're looking at. So I'm interested to hear some thoughts from the audience on here, but you can put your answer in the comment section below. And we're going to have a couple of polls throughout this conversation about different topics that Jim is going to pick up. I'm saving one of the most controversial for the end. So if you're not hooked yet, let me put that little hook out there that we're going to cover one of his recommendations. I think it's going to stir up some blood pressure, shall we say. So stay tuned for that. All right. So as we start getting some of the answers in here from the poll, Jim, I hear what you're saying, and let me just kind of summarize this from my own perspective. The population is getting older. That population includes sterile processing professionals, obviously. And that means that our departments are getting older, which means eventually we're going to start seeing a wave of folks retire. And there's not going to be the same wave of folks coming into the department to replace them. So what kind of practical impact is that going to have on a normal sterile processing department?
Well, I think it's going to put a large strain on our people to do more with less. It's going to result in an increased demand. We're going to have greater volume of instrumentation needed, more complex instruments, and fewer people to be performing that work. So it's imperative that we jump out ahead of this and figure out, okay, well, how can we address being able to improve the applicant pool, get that increased, while also mitigating the effects of that increased demand for our services.
Right. Yeah, and even if you look at a small facility, the impact on them is going to be different than if you're looking at like a 1,000 bed hospital who, in the eyes of HR, perhaps they have some people to spare, right? So maybe they've got 30, 40, 50 sterile processing technicians. So if they lose 10% of those, production's going to take a hit, but we'll just make them work harder, more overtime. And then hopefully it'll come out in the wash, maybe add some more travelers or PRN, and we can talk about that maybe in a minute. But also, if you look at the small facilities who only have one person or only have two people working, and they're in that age bracket of in 10 to 20 years, they're going to be looking for a retirement age. And if there is not a standing staffing pool, it's ready behind them who are trained and credentialed and experienced who can step in to that role, then especially these smaller facilities are going to feel that hit as much, if not more so, in the big boys.
My big worry is for the smaller, more rural facilities where they may not have the access to the well-trained people, where they may not have access to educational opportunities to provide that training.
Oh, yeah, totally. And in that survey that I mentioned that we did with Dr. Nickel here recently, that educational piece was a big one to get a pulse on what does educational opportunities look like now for folks in the field? What are they using? How many in-services a month are they participating in, to see where the gaps are? Because if there's gaps now before this looming staffing crisis hits, and they're only going to be exacerbated if we don't fix those gaps in the next 10, 20 years, if we can't actually address the demographics, right? I want to give a shout out to a couple of commenters here that we've got on the thread. So they're responding to the audience poll, this first one that says, do you believe that we're heading into a staffing crisis? And I don't think I've seen any no's here, Jim. Everyone seems to say yes. Our facility is currently seeking, is what Rita says. Then we hear from Julia in California, says, yeah, so true for staffing. Bob says, yep, the crisis is already here. and we continue to see a yes, 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 yes. Same thing for skilled and complex trades from David. Then some comments here about technology, which they may be reading your mind here, Jim, or perhaps they read your article.
Maybe so.
That we'll talk about here in a bit. So speaking of the article, I'm going to read this question, then we'll put up the next poll. In your article, right, you lay out this vision for the looming crisis. And, some folks could say you scare the crap out of us because this thing is coming down the pipeline. But then you put out some recommendations, right, for some opportunities to provide a comprehensive approach to address the issues. And the first one that you say is to make sterile processing a more visible and attractive field for young people to enter. What did you have in mind when you wrote that?
Well, one of the things that I have noticed is people just don't know about sterile processing departments. I would ask any in our audience, did anybody know that the department existed before they began working in a hospital? And I would estimate that fewer than 20% could say yes. I fell into it quite by accident myself. What we need to do is we need to make sure that people know this field is out there. And so there are some very simple, easy ways to do that. Having a presence at high school career days, going to job fairs,
I love that.
Having proclamations and press releases for things like, International Central Service Week, just things to make sure that we get our name out in the marketplace where people know that we exist. A fun way to do it would be through encouraging use of department swag when people are walking out on the street. Proud sterile processing professional, just to get people to understand that, hey, we're here. Get them to look into it. There is this whole group of people who are not going to go to a four-year university, and they're looking for what is a good career.
Right.
They don't even know we exist. We need to make sure that they do.
Right. No, I mean, I can say personally, before I got a job in sterile processing, I had no idea the job existed. And actually, when I took the job, all that I really knew before I went in, for the interview was it was in a hospital. It was shift work, so I could work second shift, and then I could go to school in the morning, and it provided benefits. And the particular hospital that I was hired on as I started offered tuition reimbursement. And at that time, I think it was like $3,000 a year, which that's a lot of money if you need $3,000 to make ends meet for your tuition, that's worth enticing folks, into the field with that kind of thing. And as often happens, I fell in love with the job. I was not going to any program that had to do with healthcare. And I started working this position particularly for those reasons. And then the more that I learned about it, the more opportunity that I saw to help people and to change the industry for the better. And then here I am 11 years later. So I think your point about getting creative with these answers and trying to utilize, things like swag, that is, in the past couple of years, I have seen more swag come out on the internet for sterile processing folks than the other 8 or 9 years I've been in the industry combined. Like back in the day when I first started, if you wanted something that said sterile processing, it was really one place that you could get it, and it was one of the certification groups, and it was only during CS week, right? So that was your only option. But now if you go onto Facebook, it's everywhere. There's t-shirts, like I got a t-shirt on right now. It says, I'd rather be in Deacon Tam, right? So like those things are out there, but they're out there, to your point, in a way that is creating a culture of sterile processing that we can be proud about who we are, and actually show that into the industry, especially to, I mean, not the industry, into the world, especially to young people, to say, hey, what does your shirt mean, and why are you so proud to be a sterile processing technician? And I've just been seeing that happen the last couple of years.
Yeah, and that's the thing that we need to do is just we can all be ambassadors for our profession, and we need to serve as that. But we also need to do some things to make sure that we're getting our message into the right place. So like at those job fairs or high school career days, so
Right.
that when people are thinking about it, it can be in their mind at that point as well.
Right. Well, even if we're talking young people, we would be remiss to mention social media. I know this interview is not about social media, so I'm not going to sidetrack us, right? But the fact that you and I are talking on this platform that's live streaming to Facebook, to LinkedIn, to YouTube, those are the places where the next generation of sterile processing folks are. They are on social media. They're on TikTok. I've had conversations with a couple of companies over the last 2 months, talking about the potential for TikTok in sterile processing and in marketing and education. And it's kind of a slow conversation sometimes. Folks are like, oh, no, not TikTok. You're like, I'll go on LinkedIn, baby, but you're not going to get me on Facebook, and you're definitely not going to get me on TikTok. But if we're talking about the future, if we're talking about a 15-year-old that in 3 years, in just 3 years, they're going to make a decision about the career or college that they're going to go into. And man, wouldn't it be awesome for the next 3 years to be hitting them on TikTok, on Facebook, on Instagram with great insight and perspective on an industry that's changing and has opportunity in it in sterile processing? Wouldn't it be awesome to be doing those things right now for the next 3 years to capture them at 18 so that there's no question they're going into sterile processing?
Certainly, and that's where I think Beyond Clean has been such a great leader in moving the conversation to talking about our presence on social media and getting us out there and getting us more visible. This is absolutely something that's going to be critical, because if people don't know we exist, then we just will not be able to recruit the people that we need for the work.
Yeah. Well, I'll send you your payment later for saying that about Beyond Clean. And obviously, we're excited about the opportunity that we have to lead the industry and to show the industry. But if you talk to anybody on our team, and I'll say this again from this stream, our mission at Beyond Clean is not to be the only ones that are doing this. We want to show people the value of investing in social media, investing in network as a company, as an individual, as a department. The last season, I guess season 8, we got feedback on one of the episodes where we had a manager who said that they play the Beyond Clean podcast every week for their staff meetings. It's kind of part of their clinical education, right? That's the kind of feedback and the kind of creative utilization of this new platform that gets to your point. It gets to the audience poll down at the bottom that says, how are we making this industry more visible and more attractive? We've got to get outside of the traditional mode of things. No 15-year-old is going to go to a national conference. There's no 15-year-old out there that's going to pick up an industry magazine, likely. Nothing against conferences. We do conferences, nothing against magazines. I read magazines. But if we're addressing this crisis that you said, we've got to be thinking next generational and really leveraging new technology, I think. I'm going to jump in here to the comments real briefly here, and then we'll jump to your next question. So we've got a comment here that says, to solve the problem, go a sterile single use. Okay, that's an idea for some products there. I think not all.
That is good, but there is just an inescapable fact that we will never be able to get away. And shouldn't get away from reusable medical devices. We have to have those. It would be absolutely economically unfeasible to go completely disposable for all of our medical devices.
We got a comment here from Mark Copeland, who I think you may know from times gone by, Jim. He says that he gets the sense that sterile processing is a trade and not a job. It's a career path for a lot of people. And I think he's alluding to the fact that a lot of folks get into sterile processing, get their foot in the door to go on to be nurses, to go on to be surgical techs, to be respiratory therapy, which in and of itself is not a bad thing.
No.
It's not a bad thing to grow. We want folks to be able to experience their full potential. However, if that's the only thing that our industry is and becomes good for as a stepping stone, then I would have to agree with Mark that that's the wrong direction. What do you say about that?
I agree. Well, certainly, I would never try to say we should limit people's growth and development and that we should never try to hold people back. I believe that working in sterile processing can be a very rewarding career, and we can establish career progression in our field. I started out at $6.37 an hour working at a hospital in Kansas, where all I did was decontamination for 11 months. But I worked my way up to become a system director of a multi-site healthcare system. It can be done. That doesn't mean everybody wants to, and not everybody should. When I was in the Army, I had a problem with the move up or move out philosophy. I think there is certainly a place for that person who has no upward mobility aspirations, that they want to be their best sterile processing technician for life. And I would applaud somebody if that is their ambition. But we do need to make sure that we in our profession do everything we can to provide those opportunities for growth and development within our profession, as well as being able to use it as a stepping stone for other things if that's what people want.
Yeah, well, to your point about the person that wants to stay as a sterile processing technician for their entire career, like, we need those people. We need people who are going to come in and commit to show up for 30 years. And what a lot of folks don't realize, and I think that you would totally agree with this, is even if your job title doesn't change, you can still grow in your career, and you can grow in your knowledge and in your skill set and in your speed and productivity and in your quality outputs. All of those things can and should grow. And it goes back to a phrase that I like to throw out when I'm having interviews or giving interviews, and folks say, "Oh yeah, I've got 20 years experience." Well, I ask them, is it 20 years experience or is it 1 year experience 20 times? Are you actually growing in your career, or are you just repeating that year one again and again and again? So you're just as fast and just as knowledgeable as you were 12 months in 20 years later. And that's not the place that we need to be as an industry, for sure.
Oh, certainly. I actually had a job working as a dental assistant one time where I came in and I was so green I did not know the job. But when it came to the end of my orientation period, I was still pretty rough. But one of the things that allowed me to continue in that position past my orientation period was the fact that I showed growth, that I continued to learn and that I wanted to keep learning. And within a couple of years, I was one of the people that people came to for answers when they had a question. And I think that that is an important thing that we need to be emphasizing within our departments, is just that continual learning, continual growth, even if you are in the same position. Become someone that other people can come to when they have a question.
Okay, so this is a good opportunity, I think, to do our first giveaway. So for those of you who are on your phone, you may be behind on this one, but the first person who can send me an email in the subject line, say free book. If you send me an email that says free book, I will give away a free copy of my new book, The Front Line. That is the first book in our industry approved for CE credit, 4.5 CE credits for reading the book and then passing the CE quizzes in that book. The foreword to the book was written by a good friend and mentor, Chuck Hughes. Great insights, I think, in the book. But again, the most exciting thing about it, I think, is that you can read it and get credit for it. How awesome is that? So I'm going to give that book away to the first person who sends me an email. And my email is hank@beyondclean.net. That's hank@beyondclean.net. So first email I get with free book in the subject line will get a copy of that, and I'll ship that out to you. Here a little bit later, I'll give away a free mug from our Beyond Clean merch store. And then we'll give away a t-shirt because Jim is encouraging us to wear t-shirts about the sterile processing industry out in public. So we're going to give away one of those shirts. In fact, maybe I'll give away one of these shirts. I'd rather be in Deacon and you can explain that to strangers on the street, right? Okay.
That's right. Get it out there on the street. Get noticed.
All right. So going back, we talked about your first recommendation is to make sterile processing more visible and attractive, but you give actually 3 recommendations. So your second one, I would say, addresses what some folks out there call the demographic winter that's coming, and it's that declining birth rate in the aging population that you referenced. And you say in this article that we need to increase the availability of education programs that will provide the pipeline for new entrants into the field. Can you walk us through what your vision is on that particular recommendation?
Well, I think that there are multiple fronts that you can attack on that one. The first is we need to be in those areas where there already is an educational system available. Our healthcare organizations need to partner with those colleges to help them in being able to get their technicians the hands-on training. Those externship systems, I absolutely love that. I get the students to come in for their 10 weeks of externship, and as a leader, it's, I hate to sound crass, but it's free labor. It's a great opportunity to give back to the community, even if they don't end up working at my institution. I can feel good that I have helped contribute to the overall education, because people going to the hospital, a mile down the road, they're my friends and family.
Right.
We don't need to be in such a strict competition. We need to be making sure that, that they have good folks too. It's also a great working interview. I look at it as like a 10-week working interview. If I get a student who comes in and I see that they do really well, then this is a person, when I have an opening, that I'm going to already know, hey, this is a good person to bring in.
Right.
So where we have those situations available, I believe the healthcare organizations really need to develop strong partnerships with those colleges. Another great way to do that is by serving on the faculty advisory committee or community advisory committees for these systems. When I was in York, Pennsylvania, I helped with one of the local technical colleges when they were developing their program and providing advice on, what do we in the community want to see in the people who graduate from this program? That's a critical thing. If we want to get good people, then help the schools in providing advice. What do our folks need? What would we want them to have?
I mean, that's a huge point that a lot of HR professionals, I get so frustrated with our recruiters because they'll send me, 10 applications, say, Hank, we got 10 folks that are ready for you. And I'm looking at their resume and I talk to them on the phone, and then I get back in touch with the recruiter and say, what were you thinking? Like, these folks are nowhere near prepared or are the type of candidate that we need. And it's because, the recruiter has no idea what makes a good sterile processing technician. So that's a great point, Jim, of helping as a community to share that information, give that profile of the perfect sterile processing technician, or at least the perfect trained and educated student in the field coming in that you would want to train then in your department. What does that person look like? And it's not intuitive, and it's not the same as what would make a good materials management technician or a good EVS or a good cafeteria worker. Or is it completely different skill sets, and they're all valuable, but that knowledge has to get into the hands of the educators and the curriculum developers, or we're not going to see the results that we're asking for.
Oh, exactly. I've always said that I always look for less about the actual knowledge and experience as opposed to the intangibles, things like being able to be teachable. However, it is very important that when I've got somebody coming into my department, they know what they're going to be getting into. I remember vividly one day when I was a technician. I was working in decontamination Monday morning, and we always assign the new person to decon first. He didn't come back from lunch because he couldn't stand the sight of blood.
Wow.
How does that happen? That we bring somebody in without knowing that, and that he doesn't even know when he's coming in.
Right.
That was a failure on both our parts there, the organization and the individual. We need to make certain that they know what they're going to be getting into, but we need to have that partnership with the education system. That's the only way, with the increased demands on our staff, the increased knowledge requirements, that we're going to be able to get good people in. We need to have great partnerships, because the fact of the matter is we can't just bring people in off the street anymore.
Yeah, well, not if the majority of our departments don't have educators and that we don't have the time to do dedicated classes to train them on the job as perhaps we may have had in previous generations. Yeah, like, that's not an option. And I even, I want to give a shout out to a program down in San Antonio that we worked with at my facility down there that had a high school program. It was a healthcare careers high school there in San Antonio. And part of their junior and senior year, students could sign up for this course. They go through the training and curriculum. As seniors in high school, they work in our department as part of their hands-on training. They graduate high school and they sit for the certification exam. And to your point, because they worked for us, I had an opportunity to interview them for 3 to 6 months to see which ones were the high performers and say, please come work for us when you graduate. And not only do they come in then with credentials and school training, they come into our department because they're externing with us. They come in with knowledge of the department, how to find the cafeteria, where the front door is, like all those things that are, I guess, like just frustrating parts about training new folks off the street. Like you said, if you collaborate in that setting with either high school courses or local technical college, it's a win-win for everyone involved. There really is no downside besides, and I understand the pushback from some of the managers who feel like they don't have staff available or time available or space available to have more than 1 or 2 people in their facility, and it becomes more of a drag than a positive impact. And I understand that, but if we're looking at a looming staffing crisis, something's got to give. So where are you going to give it?
Yeah, I completely understand. every time that I've partnered with the local college, I've had to set limits on the number of students that we could accept at any given time, simply because, well, yes, it does make those preceptors a little less productive, but in the long run, it pays strong dividends. Unfortunately, I feel like our industry has always been looking at what do I need today? And that's all we focus on. We're in a situation where that will not suffice. We have to be looking towards the future, planning and preparing. If we don't, then we are going to be caught completely unprepared. And the safety of our patients is too critical to allow us to not prepare properly.
Right. So let's take a pause here, and I'm going to look at a couple of the comments here. We had one comment from LinkedIn that said that their recruiter actually came into their department and learned about the job and is the best recruiter that she's ever had or that he's ever had. So that's a great feedback there, kind of good best practice, I would say, if you can pull those recruiters into your department for a little while to see what this job entails. To your point that, hey, there's going to be blood involved, so perhaps you should ask the candidate ahead of time, what do you think about the sight of blood? Right, so that's good best practice.
There are certainly things like that. Oh, excuse me. I have to run right now. My dog is outside in the rain. I'll be right back.
Sure, get that. All right, so as Jim goes and tackles his dog, we're going to use this opportunity to give another giveaway. So we mentioned a second ago that I'm going to be giving away a book to the first person that emailed me. So I'm sure I've already got an email who has won the book so far. And now we're going to give away the coffee mug for this next giveaway. So the first person who can send me an email that says free coffee beyond clean to my email address at hank@beyondclean.net. And that's hank@beyondclean.net for the free coffee mug on our website. And if you win, I'll ask you what coffee mug you want. We got a lot of cool designs from the Sterile Processing artwork series that we've been doing. We've got some other ones that say clean, dirty, sterile, 270, a lot of fun designs on there. So the first person who can email me that for the coffee mug will get that one. And then the last giveaway we'll do here in a bit will be for the free t-shirt. So just stay tuned for that, if you will. So Jim, let's close it out here, or I guess at least start moving toward the end. So the last proposal that you give in this article for pushing back against the demographic challenge that's coming toward us, and this is the controversial one. This is the one I think that we're going to get some insights or pushback perhaps on it. Is you encourage us to incorporate robotics and automation in our work. Can you give us a little insight on what this could or would look like from your perspective?
Well, I want to say, first of all, I absolutely do not favor replacing people with machines. There is no machine that could ever replace a good qualified sterile processing technician. But we do have to accept the reality that we are going to have fewer people to do the work. So let's identify those tasks that a machine could do in order to free up our technicians to do the things that only they can. No robot could ever inspect an instrument for cleanliness and function. That can't happen. But there are automated guided vehicles that can move a case cart from the assembly area to the operating room, or from the operating room to decontamination. That's one of the things that we were incorporating into our plan for the new hospital at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta that will be opening up in 2024, to have automatic delivery of dirty case carts. Wouldn't that be great to get your dirty case cart immediately delivered instead of having it sit up by an elevator for 2 hours before somebody finally sends it down?
Right.
Okay, so we can improve quality at the same time as decreasing the work on those things that we really don't need to have our people doing.
Right.
There are capital equipment manufacturers who have little robots that look kind of like an R2D2 that's flat like a table that
Okay.
can move a washer rack from the sink to the washer and load it into the washer. We
Right.
don't need to have people doing that kind of thing. Instead, we can have them concentrating on actually cleaning, doing that manual scrubbing that must be done.
Right.
But which is one of the first things to get sacrificed when they're in a time crunch.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
So let's ask the audience here to give some feedback. I got the audience poll down at the bottom. And the poll for this topic is, how do you feel about seeing more automation and robotics in sterile processing? And as we're waiting for some answers on that, I'll give a little bit of feedback, Jim, like you bring up the case cart vehicles. And we actually had those at my last facility in San Antonio that took the completed case carts up to the operating room and brought the dirty ones back down. And you're right, that was it was a great technological innovation and solution that could go 24/7. They don't take potty breaks. They don't have to be trained. They just have to be programmed. Now, obviously, with any technology, there's issues and there's breakdowns, but that's not a reason to say the technology is not good. It just means it's got some improvements to be made. But the coolest robot that I've seen was actually one that we saw at the World Congress. Bob Mars and I went over to the Netherlands last October when I spoke at the World Congress, and in their trade show, they had a robot that could wrap trays, and it was slowed down so we could see the process, but it would move a tray to the middle of a wrap, and then this robotic arm that kind of looked like a Da Vinci machine almost, not as many arms, would wrap the tray. And it would do everything from wrapping the tray, put the indicator in, to even apply tape on the tray itself. Now, like regardless of what you think about that particular technology, it gets at something that you kind of alluded to with the robots that move the racks in decontam from the sink to the washer and those kind of things. It gets at ergonomics, and it gets at the potential injuries that we have in sterile processing from doing repetitive actions again and again and again that could actually be hurting us, or lifting up those heavy manifold racks in decontam to put on like the automation rollers and everything. Those things can be heavy, slippery, and sharp, none of which are a good recipe if you don't want to get hurt in decontam. So I'm a big fan of automating any of those processes that could protect our people and give them more time to do the things, to your point, that only a human being can do.
Oh, certainly. When I was in Pennsylvania, we had automatic loading and unloading sterilizers. It was nice to just be able to push the sterilizer rack up to the door, and then the sterilizer would pull it in, close up the door, do its work, eject it out the back door. Those are things where my technicians don't need to be doing that. Plus, it eliminates the greatest risk that I have seen over my career in sterile processing is burns from loading and unloading sterilizers, and back injuries from when the sterilizer carts get a little bit off kilter and you have to try to lift it. And that's always where I've seen the most injuries. Things like that. And that can go to helping to delay the retirements of our staff if we're not putting such burdensome physical demands on them. It increases our efficiency. It decreases the physical demands on our people. It decreases the risk of injury, and therefore it can't do anything but help. Now, yes, we always need to look at technology as a tool and not simply the solution. But it's part of it. It's part of the overall approach.
So let's say that folks are convinced, right, of your data. They're convinced of the UN trending numbers that we see on demographics. They see the looming crisis. They hear your recommendations here about the visibility of the industry, creating educational pipelines, and then also now potentially automating or adding robotics to supplement for the staffing that we're going to lose in those trends continue as they look to do. So what is next? Like, what would people who are concerned after watching this interview and this conversation, who want to make a positive change about this, from your perspective, what would you encourage them to do? What would you encourage them to read? What can they be doing now to be part of the solution?
Well, I would say that the greatest thing that we can do is be talking with each other about this and bouncing ideas off each other. No one person is going to have every solution. But I do believe that together as a community, we can come up with a lot of great ideas. There are multiple fronts to doing this. The first thing is you've got to recognize it's an issue, be working with each other. And I would say just investigate what opportunities are available in your area to do those things to raise the visibility, to do those things to improve the educational system, to the partnerships, to get a better pipeline. Even if you don't live in a place where there might be a local college, could you do something like one of those SPD 101 classes? You know, we see a lot of those happening in surgical services where they'll have like Peri-Op 101 because operating room nurses are hard to find. And so they recruit nurses from within the organization. They go through an 8-12-week class, whatever it is, on what it's like to be an operating room nurse and get their training. We can do things like that. We can identify those people who might be working in other departments. We have to just get creative, but the first thing is recognize you've got an issue coming up. Work with people to come up with creative ideas. Talk with folks. Make sure that you're talking with your leaders about this and getting them. Make sure that you're talking with your recruiters in HR about this. They keep track of the trends. They might not be thinking about it so much in terms of sterile processing because doctors and nurses are getting a lot of the publicity about their upcoming shortages. But we need to make sure that everybody who's a stakeholder in this and everybody who can help is really looking at it. I'm not trying to create a panic. However, it would be remiss of me not to sound the alarm. You know, there was a situation many years ago where a barge hit a bridge that went over a river in Oklahoma, and it knocked part of the bridge down. And somebody in a truck was driving along and was going to tumble into the river until somebody shot a flare directly at the truck. Now, the guy in the truck, he's like, oh my God, what's going on here? But somebody sounded the alarm and prevented him from being able and made it to where he stopped and was able to keep from tumbling into the river and dying. We need to be doing that, making sure that we're sounding the alarm, not to cause panic, but to prevent harm from occurring. Patient safety is too critical to allow it to happen solely by accident.
So, sterile processing industry, here is your flare from Jim Carlock, the author of The Looming Sterile Processing Staffing Crisis, the blog that was published in December of 2019 on the Beyond Clean website. after this live stream ends, I'll put the link in the comment section of this thread so you can go read the article if you haven't seen it yet. And I want to thank you, Jim, for your time. Again, thank you for being willing to be a guinea pig at the last minute on the first live stream that we've done through LinkedIn Live. But before anyone goes, we're going to do the giveaway for the Beyond Clean t-shirt swag. And I'm going to give away the I'd Rather Be in Decon shirt to the first person that sends me an email at hank@beyondclean.net. In the subject line, can you say free decon, please? The first person to say free decon to hank@beyondclean.net, then I'll get you one of these shirts in the mail, and you can help solve the looming staffing crisis by representing sterile processing to those around you in the public, and hopefully do all the other things that we discussed on this conversation. Jim, thanks again for your time. Thanks for everyone who tuned in and commented and was a part of this conversation. The only thing I would add to all that you said, Jim, is continue to engage online through social media. I really think that is it's a key part of the solution, the conversation, and hopefully preempting the crisis, as you put it. Hopefully we get 20 years down the road and we have figured this out through all the things that you've mentioned. So thanks again for your time, and hope to talk again soon.
Well, thank you so much, Hank. It's been a fabulous opportunity. I hope that the community comes together to work and solve this problem.
Great. Okay, guys, keep fighting dirty, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks.